DWYER. Hosting the call this morning where we have Commissioner Henry Dean from District 5 on with us. And he covers very much. Good morning, Commissioner Dean, and thank you for joining us. Just on behalf of the South Beaches Business Council, it's wonderful to have you since you oversee, on behalf of the commissioners, much of what we have as our geography here on Anastasia Island and downtown and so forth. So we're very interested in your thoughts about what's going on relative to the economy coming back to life here, tourists hopefully coming back to St. Augustine. I know they are around where I live because I see a number of the vacation rentals filling back up. But I do want to represent the other board members for the South Beaches Council, Charles Eberhard, Trudy Padilla, and Kristen White. We're very helpful in working as a team and bringing all of you today's program. So Commissioner Dean's just going to offer up some comments about what he sees as being very important aspects of what's going on in St. Johns County in this area. And then we encourage you to offer up questions. Please go to the chat feature at the bottom of your screen and offer some questions which we'll field. And so after some comments from Commissioner, we'll open it up and see where we can take the conversation. So with that, Commissioner Dean, over to you.
First of all, good morning, everyone. I feel like I'm really part of this local community. I have resided in St. Augustine Beach for the last 10 years. And before that, I resided near Crescent Beach, about 2 miles north of the 206 bridge. So I am sort of, since 1984, have been a resident of St. Johns County. Most of that was Crescent Beach, and the last 10 years has been St. Augustine Beach. I thought what I might do is share some information about what the county has done and is doing to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, which has so impacted the entire world, really, and certainly our nation, and boiling it down to our state and then our county. We have had a sort of a real punch in the gut, if you will, with respect to our economic engine in this county and economic development and just ongoing, the ongoing economy for the workers, the good people who work every day and punch the clock. And I'll start with the fact that tourism is our #1 industry in St. Johns County. And the information I was given by the Visitor and Convention Bureau Director, Richard Goldman, is that we have roughly 66,000 employees in the private sector in St. Johns County, roughly 66,000 private sector employees. We have, of that, approximately 29,000 employees that work directly or indirectly for the tourist industry. Again, 29,000. Of that, we have approximately 15,000 full-time or part-time employees. Of the 29,000, about 15,000 either full-time or part-time employees work or are currently unemployed. I have to let my dog out. Pardon me. Come here. No, get outside. I don't know if any of you others have to deal with dog problems. But so we have, my point is, we estimate approximately 15,000 workers in the service or tourist industry that have been impacted, basically either furloughed or laid off or lost their job. It's been horrific. So we have tried to do as much as we can as a county to assist. And I'm going to give you some numbers that sort of explain what we've been trying to do. I will start with the grants that we have been able to make available to small business. And the first is our Industrial Development Authority earmarked $250,000 to small businesses that can receive up to, I believe it's $5,000 in grants for small business recovery. That's from our Industrial Development Authority. We also had received from the HUD, a community development block grant fund in the amount of $1.5 million made available to us to provide grants to small businesses up to $10,000 individually. And we are moving forward with that program. We actually have been told as recently, the update this week is that we have been told that we have been awarded some additional funds, and we were going to announce the recipients tomorrow, the 19th, but because of the additional funds, we are going to process those and be announcing the recipients, I believe, at the end of next week or the first part of the following week. But that will be over $2 million in small business grants to those who have applied, up to $10,000 each. And then at the county level, the federal government has earmarked a substantial amount of money for cities and counties, not unlike the stimulus money that was appropriated by Congress for individuals, for private individuals, the stimulus checks. Congress has earmarked funds to cities and counties to assist in COVID-19 expenses and recovery. And we just learned yesterday that we thought the first number that was announced to St. Johns County was 11 million, but we learned yesterday that that was only 25%, and that we actually are going to receive 46 million. And we will be using that money to assist in anything affiliated with or affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. That's 46 million. So in addition to those amounts of funds that will be available to us or have been made available to us to help small businesses and individuals and to assist in all the expenses the county has incurred due to COVID-19. We also, earlier this month at our June 2nd commission meeting, we were very concerned about those numbers I gave you about how the tourist industry has been impacted so severely. And the VCB and TDC came to us and requested $2 million to do a very aggressive advertising campaign to start getting tourists to return this fall to our community, because again, it's our #1 industry. And so we discussed that, and what we did is we appropriated out of the general fund reserves. The good news is St. Johns County has a very healthy reserve fund. We've been very, I guess, committed to making sure that we have sufficient money in our reserves account. And that may go back to the fact that we were starting to experience major hurricanes, Matthew in 2016 and Irma in 17, and a close shot with Dorian that for the most part missed us. So we've been building up our reserves. So we allocated $2 million from general fund reserves to go to the Visitor and Convention Bureau Board for the advertising blitz, and they will be paying that money back to the general fund from the bed tax revenue generated over the next 5 years to pay back that $2 million. So it wasn't a grant or a gift to the tourism industry. It's basically a loan that will be paid back, but it will assist them to do what they don't have the money to do this summer, which is to do the ad blitz to get tourists back and let them know that we are welcoming tourists back to our community. So those are a number of things we've done for a response to COVID-19, and we will continue to work hard to make sure that our community is safe and that we, at the appropriate time, have a strong, viable economy again, in St. Johns County based on tourism. We also are putting more emphasis, trying to put emphasis on diversifying our economic base. We can't just survive on tourism alone. And to that end, we have attempted, since I've been on the commission going back to 2016, to increase our commercial business and manufacturing base in St. Johns County. And I'll give you one number, for example, is that 3.5 years ago in 2016, we had the ad valorem revenue in this county comes from both residential and non-residential property owners, of course. And 4 years ago, that ratio was 90% coming from residential rooftops and only 10% coming from business and commercial business activity. And that is a very skewed ratio relative to the state. If you look statewide, the average is about 65% residential, 35% non-residential or business, commercial. So we want to, as a commission, get that ratio moving more toward the state average. And now today, instead of 90-10, it has shifted to 80%, 20%, 80% residential rooftops and 20% commercial business. So with that being said, I think we're moving in the right direction. We have taken several steps to encourage new business, commercial manufacturing in the county. One of the things we did was to lower impact fees for business and commercial development, while at the same time an increase in residential development impact fees. Residential development literally has a greater impact on our infrastructure for several reasons than commercial business development. Number one, you are dealing with probably with families with school children, not all, but many of them. They have more trips generated that impacts our roads and highways. And there is a greater need for things such as parks, libraries, and other types of infrastructure. So we have reduced impact fees for commercial development. I will tell you that we have, as recently as Monday, I had representatives of Amazon meet with me this past Monday. They are applying for county permits to construct and operate a distribution center located on the north side of Highway 16, State Road 16, just off of Inman. That is near the outlet malls that most of you are probably familiar with, that area. And that will generate 200 full-time jobs. And they hope to be open for business as a distribution center by probably, I would say, August of 2021. They have to go through the permitting process and then construction process. So that's going to take a little bit of time, but that's on the way. So we want to continue to push for and lure good, strong economic companies, clean technology, manufacturing, hospitals, healthcare. We have several large hospital complexes that have indicated an interest in developing new hospitals in the northern part of the county. We also, I thought it was sort of a creative move on the part of Commissioner Jimmy Johns a month ago at our commission meeting, after reading about the owner of Tesla, the electric car company that also, I guess, sent the rocket up earlier this month or in May. Anyway, I think his name is Elon Musk, and he announced earlier this year that he was fed up with California regulations and was going to relocate. And so we sent him a package, including all of our good information about St. Johns County, and strongly encouraged him to consider relocating his business, since he's leaving California, to St. Johns County. And that would be a pretty nice boost if we were able to locate the Tesla manufacturing here in St. Johns County. There are a number of areas in the county that would be a nice fit for that. So those also on economic development, I want to say that we have made some organizational changes in the last month or so, and Joy Andrews, who has been very, very active in all of the issues I just described about grants to local business in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Joy Andrews is also going to basically she's going to be overseeing economic development and basically heading that unit up in addition to her other roles as assistant county administrator. And I specifically wanted to mention her name for those of you who would have any reason to contact the county involving business expansion, business needs, economic development. Joy is our key contact now, Joy Andrews. And so with that, I think, Ed, I will stand by to see what questions, if any, or areas that I may have missed that you would like me to address with respect to county issues.
Those were perfect. You know, that Amazon news is something that I don't know that I've seen socialized yet in the media and so forth. So you might have made some news this morning.
Well, they didn't tell me it was confidential, and they indicated 200 employees. So
yeah.
I thought it would be worth mentioning, since that's what we're talking about is economic.
That's fantastic. It's great news. And as it relates to Elon Musk, yeah, why not, right? Why not throw your hat in the ring and see what might happen? You know, you look at St. Johns County, and there's no question, Commissioner, that we see rooftop developments going on everywhere. And boy, I tell you, the strategy you've brought in talking about wanting to increase the mix of commercial and industrial makes perfect sense. You know, me being a former banker, you always want to have that buffer. You want to have, you know, don't have too many eggs in one basket. And obviously tourism is a major function of this whole community. But to be able to have that commercial infrastructure here as well creates a buffer in times like these. So hats off to you and your fellow commissioners in the administration for thinking about that. You know, and along that realm that you mentioned, the improvement in the mix from 90-10 to 80-20 over the time that you've been on the commission. I'm on a couple of nonprofit organizations here in town, and people are discussing and wondering, you know, how is St. Johns County doing overall from a budgetary standpoint? And, you know, I've heard some people under the impression that revenues are down because of the impact of the shutdown of the tourism industry and otherwise. So if you could help clear that up, because I know you've got some good news to tell us about how the county's doing financially.
It's for those who have not really had any reason to get into the weeds about county revenues and county expenses. It gets a little bit, I guess, in the weeds, and you have to kind of understand there are different buckets of tax money and where money can be spent and not spent. And let's talk about at least three sources of revenue for the county. Ad valorem tax revenue comes from property owners who own either houses or businesses. They pay an annual property tax. All of you are probably familiar with that. Then there's also the sales tax, a small portion of the sales tax we receive. And then there is the tourist development tax, which a lot of people refer to as the bed tax paid by hotels and bed and breakfast. And right now that's at 4 cents on the dollar. Now, the bed tax can only be used for certain limited tourist activities, such as marketing, such as some limited infrastructure and beach renourishment. But that's the bed tax. It generates about $12 million a year up until the COVID-19, and revenues have dropped 95%. Sales tax revenues have also across the state, and the state, by the way, receives most of its revenue each year from the sales tax. The sales tax everyone pays on most goods, with some exceptions like food and medicine. And so, but at the county level, let's talk about St. Johns County. the vast majority of our revenue that supports our county functions, whether it's fire and rescue, law enforcement, that's all public safety, whether it's road and bridge maintenance, whether it's the libraries, whether it's recreation and parks, all those things are supported by the property tax or the ad valorem tax. And in our county this past year, our property appraiser, Eddie Kramer, spoke to us on Tuesday at our county commission meeting and announced that we had this past year that we are in, we had an increase in our property assessments, the valuation of our county-wide property that is taxed. That valuation went up $1.5 billion, not million, billion, as in B as in Baker. So the increase in our property tax base for ad valorem taxes went up 1.5 billion. So we estimate this coming budget year, which takes our budget year, we operate like the federal government on the calendar, October 1 to September 30th. So when we go through our budget process, we'll be adopting we'll be setting our millage rate for the first time in July, and then we will be adopting in September. We'll have a tentative hearing and final hearing on our coming year's budget, which takes effect October 1. And it's right now with that increase. And by the way, a good portion of that increase did come from business, commercial, manufacturing, construction for new business. And so that increased the value of our assessed valuations in this county pretty strong. And so we look at probably 8 to 9% increase in our overall assessment, property assessment valuation. So that, I think, is a good news story in the sense that we will have sufficient funds to keep our county running and provide the kind of quality of life that most people expect and should expect and deserve in this county. I think the bottom line, if you look at our overall tax base and the fact in Florida that we don't have a personal income tax, and if you look at surrounding counties, they have higher ad valorem taxes than we do. We have a relatively low tax base, relatively speaking, in St. Johns County, and I think most people would agree a high quality of life, given the fact that we're number one in public school, in our public school system in the state, have been for the last 8 or 9 years. We're the number one in per capita income. We're number one in health. We have tremendous amenities in this county, such as parks, preserves, Guano River Preserve, just beautiful areas. And personally, I sort of like the golf courses, but that's my personal preference. But to answer your question, we're in really, really good shape financially relative to probably statewide is going to be a problem because the state budget, I don't know how the governor and legislature are going to have to probably reallocate or readjust what they thought was going to be a $92 billion budget, which is now probably going to be $1 or $2 billion less because of the drop in the sales tax, which is what they base their revenue on primarily.
Right. So if that really is incredible that the valuations of the properties here in St. Johns County is going up $1.5 billion collectively. And that even includes the fact that people who are homesteaded on their residences are capped. So that is the non-homestead properties and then including all commercial, correct?
That's correct. And it also demonstrates the increase in property tax revenue tied to commercial business and manufacturing. Right. Because that had the largest increase in revenue because, as you say, Ed, there is a lesser amount that comes in from residential rooftops based on the homestead exemption.
Well, it's good to know too that you raise the impact fees on those residential developments because they certainly do have an impact, as you said, on schools, on the water system, the water supply, on traffic, and so many other things. Getting a number of really great questions that I hadn't even thought of. So thank you for those submitting. So, commissioners, a lot of questions that we read about the affordability of living in St. Johns County. There was even an article recently about some of the local police departments that some of the people on the force can't afford to live in St. Johns County, that they're driving in from other counties. And so as we're seeing more and more new developments and we're having a good revenue experience here in the county, what can you speak to relative to affordability in housing?
Well, one thing that, let me say this, I have personally been concerned about the lack of affordable and workforce housing in this county, as well as economic development. Those are two of the areas I'm pushing as I can the hardest personally. And one of the things we've done in the last 6 months, a group came together under the continuum of care and included folks like Bill Lazar that heads up our affordable housing partnership, several developers and county representatives. And we came up, Ed, with a pilot project for affordable and workforce housing. And we approved that about 2 months ago. And what that pilot project is that we are making available to the development community a pilot project that if one is willing to build 40% of their proposed homes at a price point no greater than $210,000. That's the price point, $210,000. All houses, at least 40%. Let's say that you're going to build 100 homes, then 40 of those homes have to be at a price point of $210,000 or less. Now, why would someone do that? The way we did it without using your tax dollars, your local tax dollars, is we said we will basically approve an increase in the density of that property up to 6 units per acre. We will provide additional density to the developer so that he can put more homes on that tract as long as he makes 40% of those homes at a price point of $210,000 or less. It's a pilot project that if it seems to work and people embrace it, we will probably expand. But the program basically is for only up to, at this point, we set a cap for the pilot project of 600 homes. We set that number because that represents, believe it or not, 1% of the total number of entitled lots in the county. We have approximately 60,000 entitled lots that have been approved over the last 20 years. Those include, for example, developments that were approved before the Great Recession of '08 and still have not been built. For example, Nocatee is not built out. Silverleaf is really just getting underway, although it was initially approved in '06. So my point is, we're taking a very small portion of our entitled lots. So any developer who wants to come in and say, I have these number of lots and I'm willing to do some affordable or workforce housing up to 40%, at least 40%, then those homes, as long as they cost no more than $210,000. And by the way, it's controlled that you can't just build the $210,000 home and then flip it for $400,000. It has to be basically sort of I guess you might call some type of condition on the title of the property that it stay in the same ownership for a period of time. And it would also apply to the same concept on rent. You can't, there would be a rent control for a period of time. So they couldn't double or triple their money based on this program. So that's probably the biggest thing we're doing from a state standpoint for the first time in a number of years. For the first time, I think in 10 years, the legislature, under a lot of lobbying on the part of all the cities and counties in the state, went to the legislature, with us included, and said, please stop sweeping the money from the Bill Sadowski Affordable Fund, which provides millions of dollars for affordable housing, which is spread around the statewide. And they have been the legislature because they also, would prefer not to raise taxes. So what they have been doing each year for the last 10 years or so is taking the $300 million each year that is raised through documentary stamp tax on real estate transactions And instead of having it go into the trust fund for affordable housing, which was established 20 years ago, they've been sweeping that $300 million and using it for other purposes. And for the first time this year, they left that alone. We will probably receive, we think, up to possibly $3 or $4 million from that fund, St. Johns County, this year to assist in the affordable housing program. So that's where we are on affordable housing.
Excellent. No, that's a great idea. The 200,000, excuse me, value of a house to be a part of a development. And obviously we see some apartment complexes going in, the one just north of downtown on US 1. And we're seeing more and more of that multi-family type housing, which certainly is helpful. Another question, Commissioner, just again, thinking about the impact of the pandemic and the economic shutdown, that clearly it hurts the people at the lower end of the economic spectrum. And we are seeing an increase. I'm involved with a homeless shelter in town, and there's some phenomenal nonprofit resources out there helping with those who are here homeless, but also the newly, unfortunate people who are out of work and find themselves homeless. And I know there's been a lot of great work around forbearance around mortgages, delinquencies, and around rent. But nevertheless, we have more people falling on hard times. So if you might just even address the funding to those nonprofits and to other things the county's doing too, which I think the county and the city have done a phenomenal job, frankly, but you're never going to stop it completely. But funding those resources to make sure that we're being proactive and that it doesn't start to spiral out of control like so many other communities around the country.
Well, I think that this additional funding that we just learned about yesterday, that will be up to $46 million just for St. Johns County. I think all of the groups that are in need of funding for emergencies, such as the increase in homeless and the need for funding for, literally for things such as food banks, I would encourage anyone to direct your questions again to Joy Andrews, and she can put everyone in touch with the right contact, because we want to do everything we can as a county to assist not only economic development recovery, but as you say, those individuals that I'm acutely aware before the pandemic, believe it or not, housing is so expensive in this county that we had individuals working full time in very low paying jobs that were homeless and living in the woods. And they weren't just bums. There are some bums, but there were actually people with full-time jobs that could not afford the first and last month's rent and the security deposit that's needed to get into an apartment. You're up to $3,000 or $4,000 just to rent an apartment if you add first and last month rent, security deposit. And so they had no place to go. And so it's a critical problem. Even though that we are the #1 county as far as per capita income, we also have workers that are desperately needed for service industries, restaurants, hotels, etc., that they need affordable housing. They need assistance now with the pandemic. And we are going to do everything we can to assist those in need. And again, Joy is our best contact, Joy Andrews.
Great. I think it might be a good idea for those involved in those nonprofits to perhaps have a roundtable with Joy or something. We might look into that. Actually, just a technical question, Commissioner, is you think about building more commercial industrial operations in St. Johns County, and people come from surrounding counties, Duval, Clay, Putnam, to work at those facilities. That's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because the business is located in St. Johns County. Now, granted, we don't have state income tax, but we do have the taxes that the county enjoys, and those employees are really feeding revenue, I guess, right, by driving the business within the county itself.
Right. The more business that we can develop, whether it's commercial banking, whether it's healthcare, whether it's manufacturing like Tesla, is a huge benefit because it produces good jobs with good wages, and it provides a huge tax base and it has very little impact on our infrastructure relative to residential rooftops that cause huge impacts for all the things I mentioned.
Yep. Thanks for cleaning that up, because I think that it's really a win-win for us, and it's great for the Northeast Florida economy, right? That there are other counties that are not fully employed like we typically would be, and that provides jobs for folks who are looking for manufacturing type jobs, and that's just a win for the entire region.
Yeah, exactly.
One last thing for you, Commissioner, and I think we'll wrap things up. But as you think about affordability in St. Johns County for housing, and one of the things that I know is a huge debate constantly going on relative to policies that exist in the city, downtown, the beach city, and where I live out in the county, has to do with vacation rentals, right? And obviously vacation rentals are popping up everywhere, and it is certainly impacting the valuations, right? You talk about Eddie Kramer and the property appraiser for the county. Just some thoughts from you about this whole dynamic, and whether it's a good thing, a okay thing. What do you think about it relative to St. Johns County in the future of where that's headed?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind to me is a love-hate relationship. We love the revenue that's generated. We love our tourists who come. There are tourists who actually, I've met several that have come to St. Johns County and rented short-term rentals for 20, 25 years. It's a family tradition. And they operate as a family. They don't cause any problems. They're an excellent renter of a 1 week rental or a 3 day. But on the other hand, let's face it, we have, let's call it some rowdy folks who want to come and party all weekend, all night long. I mean, all night, literally until 5 a.m., throwing trash everywhere, parking 20 cars at a 3-bedroom rental. And so I have many constituents who've contacted me about the problems with short-term rentals, even though it generates quite a bit of revenue for our bed tax that I spoke about earlier, that is used for infrastructure and beach renourishment. Now, here's the dilemma, that several years ago, 10 years ago, the legislature, which they can do, they passed a law which preempted the regulation of short-term rentals statewide. So we have, as a county, we have very little ability to regulate short-term rentals with respect to all the problems I mentioned. So if you have an out-of-control short-term rental, you have to really go through the Department of Professional and Business Regulation and get them involved, because the legislature has preempted, for the most part, regulation of short-term rentals. We are in the process of, we do have some limited capabilities, such as we can require registration of short-term rentals, and we can also require that they comply with our county regulations that apply to everyone, whether it's parking, garbage collection, and things like that. But we don't have the authority to tell the owner of a short-term rental unit that he can only have 8 people in his 2-bedroom short-term rental. That has been preempted by the state. So I think ultimately you're going to see the same thing happen with short-term rentals that happened with the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, the Sadowski Trust Fund. You're going to see a continued push from cities and counties that enjoy a huge revenue source from short-term rentals, but we would like to regulate it at the local level, because we're different from Miami Beach or Daytona Beach, and we would like to have local control over regulating short-term rentals, although we don't want to eliminate them. We want to be able to make sure that they're not creating huge problems for the neighbors who have lived in that same neighborhood for 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah, no, thank you for all that. And you're right, the state can preempt the counties. We do have it where the city and the beach have their own policies that they're grandfathered in. So it creates a little bit of disparate treatment here in the county. But, the other thing I'll say that I don't think you did mention, it's a good thing, is that the county and the cities have engaged an outside organization that makes sure that people who are doing vacation rentals are registered as such, that they're not homesteaded homes that are renting themselves out on Airbnb. That's you can't do that. That's kind of have your best of both ways, and that there's a system and a mechanism forensically to determine who is trying to do that, and that you're nabbing them and saying, nope, you've got to pick one or the other. You can't do both. And then you thus need to, not have your home homesteaded, pay the property taxes that are required, and adhere to the requirements that you spoke to.
And I will give another, I guess, kudos to Eddie Kramer, because he's heavily involved in that program and has identified a number of, quote, homes that have filed for homestead, but in actuality have been short-term rentals.
Yep. And I said that was the last one. I got one more. Can you explain it was really wise of St. Johns County a number of years ago to increase the sales tax specifically for funding for the capital improvements of schools, right? For building of schools. And I know Duval County is now trying to accomplish the same thing. And it was really wise of St. Johns County to have done that some time ago. Does any of the proceeds, so that's a good thing, as the sales tax goes up, the revenues from that there's a portion of that goes directly to St. John schools for the purposes of building more schools and really abating some of the overcrowding. But does any other revenue from the county, given some of that, 1.5 billion increase in valuations and so forth, funneled over to the schools and to support the capacity with the growth of students coming in?
Well, certainly think about impact fees.
Right.
Every new home that is constructed pays, if it's over a certain square foot, say over, I think it's 2,500 square feet, pays every new unit of let's take 100-unit development. Every one of those individual units has to pay an impact fee of roughly $20,000 just for schools. And then there are other impact fees for law enforcement and raroads, et cetera. Right. So there's a tremendous amount of funds that actually are funneled. People who raise the issue with me that we're permitting too many new homes. Number one, any new development that comes to the county can't create more impacts than they pay for through impact fees. So they're really, and it's hard to tell a new developer that he not only has to pay for his development impacts, but all the past mistakes of previous builders or previous commissions that have permitted development without requiring a sufficient amount of money to cover the impacts. And in today's world, with our commission, we require any new development to pay at least amount of money to cover their impacts. And in some cases, we've had developers pay more in order to seek our approval. And I can think of two in particular. But yes, with the passage, the voters actually approved the half-cent increase in the sales tax, the local option half-cent increase 5 years ago. And I will tell you that all new school construction, be it elementary, middle school, or high school, which has occurred in the last 4 years, has all been funded by that sales tax increase to pay for capital. So then one thing we have done at the county commission level after the horrendous tragedy in Parkland with the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School massacre, where the students were killed, we all wanted, number one, safety for our children. And so we allocated funding from our general fund, our county general fund, to pay for all of the new equipment and vehicles and uniforms that were needed to put a resource officer in every school in our county, starting 2 years ago. The school board is taking on the recurring funding of their salaries and benefits each year, but they were a little short and asked us, and we did put up funds to pay a one-time payment for all the capital equipment needed to make sure that every school in our county had a resource officer, because we certainly want to do all we can to avoid another disaster such as the Parkland massacre.
Oh, that's interesting. I did not know about that one either. Commissioner Henry Dean, thank you so much. On behalf of the chamber, you'll be happy to know that this Zoom conversation has been recorded, and so we will put this out on the St. John's Chamber website for people to take a look at, because I'm sure a lot of people will hear some of your comments. So this was not a one and done. It will be live on the website. So to all of those listening in and watching today, I do encourage you to go to the website, see some other presentations that have occurred. Some great conversations have been recorded out there, maybe one plus as a result of this shutdown. And do visit the Chamber has its own Facebook and LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram, and so on and so forth. Really appreciate Andrea Knight, who worked with the Commissioner and I together to put this on board for you today on behalf of the South Beaches Business Council. We thank you all, and our next meeting will be July 16th, and we'll have some programming of what that will involve in the near future. Commissioner, have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Very well. Me as well. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.